Hello lovely people, welcome to part 2 of my April reading wrap up. I got a whole bunch of books to talk about, let's go into it.
Sophie vlogs.
The only real unifying force in my April reading was just absolutely following whims. So it's a bit of a varied selection, to be honest with you. Let's kick off with a fabulous 5-star non-fic read. This is Craftland, A Journey Through Britain's Lost Arts and Vanishing Trades by James Fox. To set the scene, I unexpectedly had to take my mum to A&E and I was not prepared for this in advance, so I picked a book from her to read pile because I was like, we ended up being there for 8 hours, I needed something to read, and that ended up being Craftland, and I am so delighted that this was the one that I just happened to come to because this was an absolute 5-star read for me. I loved this. I do have to show you when you take this little dust jacket off, it has this lovely little hand on it. Gorgeous, beautiful run through around Britain that is looking at these different crafts, trades that we are effectively losing. It has a real variety throughout that I found so delightful to learn. To give you like a smattering, a taste of what is in store, we have blacksmiths, wheelwrights, cutlers and coopers, bell founders, watchmakers. It's got such a fabulous variety to it. I found this so transporting and wonderful. I think what this does really well that I loved was it is in many ways a love letter to these trades and these ways of life that we used to have, acknowledging how the loss that there would be were we to lose all of this knowledge completely, all of that kind of thing. But I think that it manages to do it in a way that it does not glorify the past as this golden time where nothing bad ever happens, and it equally is very forward thinking by showing you examples of some of these trades and crafts, the ways in which they are being adapted for the future to have longevity. And I think that it walked that line really, really well. I think it was absolutely fascinating. There is such a love and a fascination coming from the author. I found the writing style like so accessible and interesting. It made me, I like when I was reading it, I was like, I need to write down the name of all of these individual people that he is mentioning because, so, will I buy a barrel? Probably not. I have no need of a barrel, but some of these other walks of life, I was just like, maybe there will be a way that I can support this at some point. I don't know, but this, if you're someone who is interested in craft, if you are interested in social history, because so much of this is social history, this was absolutely fantastic. I definitely want to go away and see what other books James Fox has written, and if I can get my hands on some and read some, because it really took me away in a time where I needed to be swept away. So I loved this. This is an extremely non-fiction heavy wrap up, I should say. I got very drawn into non-fiction in April. One that I guess I'll briefly do one that is a not non-fiction, and that is Felicity by Mary Oliver. I mentioned in my little life update call for book recommendations videos when I was going through and I was making my little stack of what was tempting me. Mary Oliver was one, and my lovely friend Miriam was like, that's what I would have recommended. So I took that as a sign to pick up this collection. This is just everything that I expect from Mary Oliver each time. Felicity is a lovely collection of her work. There's quite a lot of these poems which I can feel her faith in them quite strongly. There's quite a lot of these poems that are to do with like love and dedication in that kind of a way. I turned down the corners of some of my favourites. I really liked Whistling Swans, which just had this one line in it. Like Rumi said, there is no proof of the soul, but isn't the return of spring and how it springs up in our hearts a pretty good hint? And reading this in April as spring was springing back out again, that sentence, I was just like, oh yes, that's how I feel about nature and about how this world coming to life again feels in my heart. I also really loved This Morning. I won't read you bits from everyone because I turned down quite a few, it turns out. I have just said has this delightful little humour to it that I really enjoyed, and The Gift, and A Voice from I Don't Know Where. It's just this wonderful, when I read Mary Oliver's poetry, I feel that gratitude for the world that I feel in my heart. I feel like someone has actually like put it into words better than I would ever do. So that was another one that I absolutely loved. And having like a little Mesopotamian moment, she says, obviously. So a book that I got out from the library was The Library of Ancient Wisdom by Selena Wisnom. And this is a fantastic non-fiction book that is all about the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal and his library, and it's essentially about the library that he curated of these cuneiform tablets. It's also a lot. It's doing so many wonderful things that I found so interesting. So it is about Mesopotamian history, and it gives you a lot of that. It gives you a lot of the history of cuneiform, how it developed as a language / script, and then also some of the journey towards being able to decode it and decipher it later. It has a lot of focus on the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the clay tablets that was within this library, and that both the story of Gilgamesh, its mythical origins, and then also like the impact that decoding it had as well, and that kind of thing. It was such a fabulously well written, accessible, interesting non-fiction book. It covers like Mesopotamian society. It also does like so many other things to do with Mesopotamian society, like about like the reading of signs and omens, the approach to like medicine, like all of these things. If you ever wanted like a whistle stop tour, brilliant. As such, I also followed that up with reading Gilgamesh by Stephen Mitchell. This is Stephen Mitchell's version of Gilgamesh. I have read the Epic of Gilgamesh before. It was translated by Stephanie. Last name begins with a D, I think. I'll put it in the thingy down below. That was a translation. This is a version, so it is being slightly more free with form, free with interpretation, being able to take, I guess, a slightly more poetic narrative storytelling kind of decisions than you would if you were being a very strict translator of. I enjoyed the translation. I don't think the translation... There's a translation that I've seen excerpts for that I really, really want to read, and I do not remember who wrote it, because I think I bought this because I thought it was that, but it's not that. There's a translation by Sophus Helle? Don't know how to pronounce his last name, but that's a translation I want to read, and then I think there might be a fourth one. So the translation itself, the version was interesting. The introduction was great. I could read Stephen Mitchell writing about the Epic of Gilgamesh for ages. It was this way, just, I love when you like read an introduction to something and this passion, this enthusiasm, this the way someone responds to the text that they are translating. I just find it so, like, it so drew me in, and I was just like, oh yeah, Stephen, tell me more of your thoughts. I'm loving them. So that was a lovely little Mesopotamian moment. In the future, I have... Sorry, it's at the bottom of a book pile. I do have Assyria, The Rise and Fall of the World's First Empire by Eckhart Fram. I'm going to read this later in the year. I'm going to take a small Mesopotamian moment break, but later we're going to loop back to it, because I feel this could be a fun little theme for the year. An audiobook that I listened to this month was Backbeats, A History of Rock and Roll in 15 Drummers by John Lingan, which was narrated by Eric Yang. This is, doing what it says on the tin, A History of Rock and Roll, 15 Drummers. I like music history books, and I don't drum, have never drummed, don't know that much about drumming, so I felt that this was an interesting angle through which to consume music history. Very listenable, but the audiobook narrator delivery was not great. I found the delivery to be quite, I guess, dry. Not a lot of character to it, a little bit robotic. I don't know, I didn't love the delivery. I did enjoy listening to the book. As a selection of drummers go, a lot of them, there were a few standout chapters where I was like, don't really know this drummer, don't really know like this person's impact on music history, really enjoying learning more. There were like a few chapters where I was like, yes. There were a lot of other chapters where I was like, this guy makes the cut, versus sometimes it was like, I understand why this guy makes the cut. I don't feel like I've learned anything particularly new from this chapter's take on him. And that's just, I think, an interesting thing to come out thinking, given that I picked this because I was like, I don't know that much about drummers, surely. And then actually there were like quite a few chapters where I was like, yeah, I know this. But I like listening to audiobooks at night when I'm trying to unwind before I go to bed. So it definitely served that function of like being interesting enough to just like hold my attention when I'm not doing other things. The women's prize book that I read was Finding Albion, Myth, Folklore and the Quest for a Hidden Britain by Zakia Sewell. This is my third women's prize for non-fic book that I have read. On the whole, I enjoyed this. I found this extremely readable. This is such a accessible non-fiction book, 100%. If you're not someone who reads a lot of non-fic, I do think, but the idea of this appeals to you, I found it eminently readable. I literally read it in like 2 days, I think. The idea of this intrigued me. So it's effectively myth, folklore, and the quest for a hidden Britain. It is exploring sort of the folklore of Britain, the mythology of Britain, but also one of the things that it's sort of looking at as it goes on is that in some ways, the argument is that in some ways it feels like England as a mythology has a less strong mythology than some of the other aspects of Britain, and it also looks at expanding, like looking at, because the author herself is mixed race, she talks a lot about the folklore mythology from where she's from in the Caribbean. She talks to a lot of other mixed race people about their experiences in Britain and their connection to, she meets a lot of people who have sort of really engaged with aspects of folklore in really interesting ways. I definitely enjoyed all of that. I think something that, to borrow her word, my upbringing was a little bit woo-woo for sure, but also I really love history. And so something that I have always struggled with is there's an element of me that loves like the mysticism, the storytelling, the folklore and the woo-woo side of it. But then the other side of me knows too much about history to always be able to like buy into stuff. So as just an example, like there's a whole chapter in this that's looking at Welsh mythology, and it kind of opens with being like, oh, it feels like Wales has such a rich mythology in contrast sometimes to England, and it's like delving into like the appeal of this mythology, and then it unpacks it to be like, well, did you know like these things, they're all inventions of this guy called Iolo Morgannwg, and then these things, this idea of the bardic tradition and this druidic robes and all of this, that's all the invention of this other Victorian guy. And as someone who has read books about both of those individual people, I'm like, yes, I did know that. But that's sort of what I was wanting this book to do. I wanted to read it to see if it was going to uncritically be like, ooh, these things, or if it was gonna like unpack and be like, I actually find it much more interesting to have conversations being like, if you're taking Welsh mythology as an example, even though we know that stuff like the Gorseth, these robes, this symbol, etc., are Victorian inventions, what is it about those inventions that appeals to us, that means that we continue to take part in these things and be drawn to these things despite knowing that that's not actually what these ancient ancestors did? That's like the side of it that I find really interesting. And so this did like enough of that to interest me. I think it probably could have done a bit more of it for my tastes. What I would say that this ended up being quite like was that every chapter had a really strong theme and exploration, but perhaps the whole thing doesn't have like one driving point through it, but I still enjoyed reading it. So yeah, definitely like an enjoyable non-fiction book, and I would be interested to see, I know it's based on a radio series that she did. A very sweet little book that I read on my library app when I was just in need of something adorable was A Visit to Brambly Hedge by Jill Barkelm. Brambly Hedge, I'm sure you know, I don't know if Brambly Hedge is like a very UK thing. I have no idea what the global reach of it is. Where I am from, I know a lot of people who feel very fondly about the Brambly Hedge books. They are so precious and adorable. Brambly Hedge is just like this little world that's full of mice who live in these like trees. And one of the big appeals of that book series, particularly when you are a child, is, but also as an adult, is these intensely detailed drawings that the author did that show sort of like the slice out of a tree and then all of the rooms and the mice and what they're doing and all that kind of thing. If you are not familiar with it, you have to just Google it. It's incredibly gorgeous and lovely and adorable. This book is just sort of like, it's a very light and fripperous exploration of that. So it begins by just doing like a little introduction to who all the mice are, what their family histories are, and all that kind of thing. And then the bit that I found most interesting was there was a lot of looking at the development of the world. It has lots of artwork in it throughout that shows, for example, like original sketches versus the final illustrations. It has information about like where she went, what she drew upon for different things, like her own life, like that kind of thing. It's a very short little non-fic, but it was delightful and it was everything I needed at that moment. And ultimately is The Bounty Mutiny by William Bligh and Edward Christian. I have behind me, hidden to your view, this is the stack of books that my partner has lent me. Should I try and show it to you? Maybe. I'm surrounded by stacks of books at all times. Just safe to assume that I'm always surrounded by stacks. This, she says, oh my god. This is the stack of books that my partner has lent me to read. There are usually reasons behind them, but also sometimes I just see books on his shelf that I think sound interesting and I add them to the stack. But it is, as you can tell, getting a bit tottery. So I'm setting myself the mission of trying to read minimum one book that he has lent me. They've all fallen over. Minimum one book that he has lent me every month. This month I managed to do 2 because I did a poetry collection in part 1, but this was the book. But this was another one that I picked up. This is the primary writings of the people who were involved with the Mutiny on the Bounty. Mutiny on the Bounty was a mutiny that happened in 1789. And there was a film made out of it called The Bounty, which is one of my partner's favourite films, and we rewatched that, and he was so enthusiastically telling me about lines in the film that are exact quotations from these original documents. And so I decided to give it a read and experience that for myself. So it is the primary writings of the people who were involved in this. The Bounty Mutiny, I think one of the reasons why the Bounty Mutiny is still so fascinating is that it kind of, first of all, there is the element of you have to kind of decide who you believe and whether you wholly believe either side of the story. And then there's the element of the William Bligh, the captain, representing sort of naval discipline and this way of life and existence, and then Fletcher Christian and sort of more of this sense of an individual right and that kind of thing. And then I guess as a third thing is so William Bligh, after the mutiny, was set off with some of these people and they did this incredible journey to get back to England, which is in itself impressive. But there's this sort of element of not 100% knowing what happened to the mutineers, because there are stories that are in this, but they are ever so slightly different. And again, there is an element of you needing to just use your judgment to be like, what do you believe to be correct? So this is a lot of the primary materials. It has William Bligh's account of what happened. It has the records from the court where they were, the various people who were involved being put on like military trial. It also has this, what I found quite funny towards the end, this like public squabbling where it was so Fletcher Christian's brother, because Fletcher Christian is the person who led the mutiny, sorry, I don't think I explained that, his brother interviewed lots of people And they just end up writing all these letters in like newspapers where Fletcher Christian's brother is like, actually, I think you'll find that blah 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 blah, and then William Bligh will be like, this is disgraceful, someone's lied to you, that's not the truth, this is the truth, and they just like back and forth argue about what actually happened and who's real and blah blah blah. That's also quite funny. So yeah, this was a very interesting, like, sort of, I guess, like, primary account of what is quite an iconic moment in history. And then finally is a book that my friend lent me. This is from Common Threads Press, who you know that I love. This is Mauka to Makai, Hawaiian Quilts and the Ecology of the Islands, edited by Marenka Thompson-Odlum. This was yet another wonderful read from Common Threads Press. I love textile history, you know that. I love quilting. I really want to learn how to quilt, but it's such an undertaking that I've been a bit... I technically do know how to do a tiny patchwork quilt. What I think is so, I guess, like, visually arresting and wonderful about these Hawaiian quilts is Hawaiian quilting tradition, something that came across with white settlers, but the Hawaiian specific tradition is quite unique in its own way, and it has, as you can see from, like, these are quilt panels, as you can see from these, it's got quite a distinct visual style. There's this element of they talked about in the introduction how a lot of patterns will be that you try to cut you're not piecing together lots of individual pieces so much as you often try to make as much from one piece as possible, which I think it makes me think of, like, paper cut art, you know, when you are you know, like that whole style of there being these large individual and it's not like there's never any breaks between, but look at the intricacy of this, and then realize how much of this is one, you know, like, pieces cut out of one piece of fabric. I just think it's incredible. There is also something absolutely sweet and darling about each of these individual quilters who made either individual quilts, or they have some quilts which are smaller pieces put together. They all are included by name, and they have a short piece of writing that they've contributed, and so many of them say about, first of all, how much being involved in quilting has enriched their life and the joy they find in it and all of this kind of thing, and then also how proud they are to be able to contribute, because this is for a exhibition in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, so their quilts are being put on display, and they're also proud of being able to contribute to this project. And I am hoping, at the time of recording, I am hoping to be able to go on a day trip to go see this exhibition before it finishes. Probably by the time this has gone up, that exhibition will have closed, but I'm really, really hoping I can go see some of these quilts in person, because I cannot emphasize enough how sturdy they are. And then also the latter half of this is about the ecology of Hawaii, and I think that is a really important inclusion. I don't know anything about Hawaii or the challenges it faces in, like, the climate crisis and the way it's exploited and all that kind of thing. I have, like, a passing awareness, but I do think that there is something very important, particularly when you are consuming. A lot of these quilts have meaning, and the patterns are based on aspects of nature and that kind of thing. I think it is important to understand the challenges that they are facing, and you know, for something to not remain just a pattern and no longer a presence in the world, and that whole thing. So I did appreciate learning much more about some of the ecological challenges, and also some of the work that people are doing to help. That's everything that I read in April. A little bit of a follow a whim kind of month. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these. Please do leave me a comment down below if you fancy it. But yes, I hope that you are having a very lovely time and everything is just peachy with you. And I will see you next time for something different.